A few years ago, Texas-based Jack Mason decided to take their watches in a slightly different direction. They wanted to start catering more to collectors. So the watch that they came out with was the Strat-o-timer, one of the first watches powered by a Miyota 9075, which is of course their Traveler's GMT. And because of that, it became a very popular movement that a lot of micro brands started using, and of course Citizen now use it in a bunch of different iterations. Today, we're taking a look at the version 2 of the Strat-o-timer. Yes, this was already an almost perfect vintage-inspired GMT that they have made improvements to. And I actually was surprised by that because I thought, and I still think, it's one of the best affordable GMTs that you can get, but they went ahead and made some improvements. So let's flip the camera and take a look at all three of the new Strat-o-timers from Jack Mason. I have all three colors, and I also have my own Strat-o-timer to actually compare it to. So let's flip the camera and take a look at 4 Strat-o-timers. How do you improve on something that is already very, very good? The original versions of this watch were crowd pleasers. You basically got everything that you need from an everyday sports watch in one watch. 200 meters of water resistance, on the fly micro adjust. You got sapphire bezels. You had a boxed domed sapphire crystal, which had a vintage look to it. You have like a 1970s inspired case, a Miyota 9075 inside, so it's a true or Traveler's GMT. All of that packed into a watch that cost under $1,000. This was the first micro brand to use the 9075. They got it right off the bat. And this was an extremely popular watch because of that. The Strat-o-timer in general is a really great tool watch, everyday watch. It's a great GMT. These are great looking watches as well. The bracelets that they made for these watches, they're kind of like a Jubilee style bracelet, but not entirely. They're a little bit more fine, I would say, than a Jubilee style. So I think they're a little bit different. And then you have this beautiful clasp on here that gives you this micro adjust that works without a button. And even though I love the ones with a button, it works way easier without a button, and it works very simply. You just pull out and push down. That's it, and I'll show you that in just a few seconds. These are upgraded versions of the original Strat-o-timer. So Peter over at Jack Mason, he's the owner of Jack Mason. He does a lot of shows. He does Intersect, he does Wind Up, he does a bunch of others actually. So constantly interacting with the people who are buying his watches. A lot of the feedback that he has gotten are the changes that he's actually made on this watch. The first change that may be a little bit obvious for some, but maybe not, is the crown. The crown is now 6.5 millimeters. It was smaller. I think it's actually a little bit bigger than that. I measured around 6.8 millimeters, and it's also wider, so it's easier to grip. The old crown was smaller, so it was thinner, and it was around 6 millimeters, so 6.2 millimeters, somewhere in that range. So it was actually harder to grip, a little bit smaller, but it still did the job, and it wasn't tiny. I think it worked, but this is a lot easier to use, and it is a lot bigger. Aesthetically, I also like it because this is around a 40 millimeter watch with a nice large crown. It looks good. So that's one of the first improvements that they made. The second improvement is a little bit more obvious in my opinion. If you look at the older versions, and I have one of the older versions on my wrist today, it is my Dr. Pepper. So I'm going to put this next to the 3 watches that we're looking at here. If you look at the bezel on this watch, the bezel on this watch is actually made out of sapphire. So that is definitely not a bad thing. And I believe they will continue to offer sapphire in certain versions of the Strat-o-timer. However, this version, like the Dr. Pepper, has a bicolored bezel, and those are the ones that will have a sapphire bezel going forward because they are bicolored. The ceramic bezels will be solid. These ceramic bezels are etched, so you have the 24-hour track etched in, and these get white fill, so it really does stand out really well. And they look good. In fact, you really wouldn't notice the difference unless you really look It looks a little bit different. I like the ceramic. It's a little bit easier to read. Maybe that's the only advantage that I would give the ceramic. There is one change that you probably would not notice, and this was another customer that brought this up, the offset of the bracelet. So when you remove links on the side of the clasp, so where the clasp is actually adjustable, the offset, if you end up using that clasp to actually adjust it for your wrist, it is offset. So it's off center a little bit on your wrist because of that. So what they have done is basically adjusted the number of links on either side of the bracelet so that if you adjust it for a smaller wrist, it will be even. I've noticed that with other brands where you end up having to take out 2 links from one side and no links from the other because you want that clasp to be in the middle. I've actually had that happen to me, and I have a large wrist, so that's really cool. I haven't noticed that issue with Jack Mason myself, but apparently that might be a problem for smaller wrists with this watch. Then they also have added more lume. Now this is already a very lumed watch, a very well lumed watch. This gets a lot of lume on the hands and indices. You have a little pip in the seconds hand. You can see that it's running in the dark. I'll do a lume shot. Listen, people complain about the craziest things, but more lume, that's something I will never complain about. So I am very happy that they are doing that. Last but not least, and something you would probably never notice, they have added a hardness coating. So now it's scratch resistant up to 1200 Vickers. That is really cool. And this has not affected the price. The price of these watches still costs $999. So $1 under $1,000, but they have not gone up in price. They have stayed the same, even though they have added a hard coating and made some pretty not so insignificant changes, slight tweaks, I would say, to the overall design. And they're adding a lot of value to the watch with that extra hard coating. So that makes a lot of sense. And the fact that they're not charging more money is awesome. This still gets the Miyota 9075. It's still regulated here in the United States. These are assembled in the United States to plus or minus 5 seconds per day. That's the regulation. You still get a screwed-in case back with a sapphire crystal where you can see the movement, and you get a screwed-in crown. It is much larger, of course, and you still get 200 meters of water resistance. All of that in a package that I think looks really good. I'm going to show you some of these on my wrist. You already see the watch that was on my wrist. It is this watch right here, the Dr. Pepper, a limited edition that has sold out. That is an awesome, awesome watch. I hope they do a Dr. Pepper 2. There's the all black on my 7.5-inch wrist. Black dial, black bezel. Applied indices, those are very liberally applied with lume. Date at the 3 o'clock, you have a surround around there. And then of course on the dial you have the Jack Mason logo at the 6 o'clock. Down at the bottom of the dial, right above the 6 o'clock position, it just says Strat-o-timer, the name of the watch, automatic, and 200 meters of water resistance. These are 13 millimeters thick. They're around 12.9 millimeters thick. And you have about a 46.5 millimeter lug to lug. That's including the bracelet because you do get female end links. This is around a 40.5 millimeter or 40.6 millimeter watch on the wrist. So it depends on if you grab it at the case or at the bezel. So it's around that 40.5 millimeter width. I posted these 3 watches on my Instagram. This was probably the most popular. Green dial, green bezel, the Hulk. It looks awesome. And this one gets an orange GMT hand. The other 2 get a red GMT hand. So a little bit different from the other 2. I think the orange and the green go together really, really well. However, my favorite out of the trio is the white dial or silver dial. Originally, my favorite was the green. However, when I saw this one, it really popped. It's super legible. It's good looking. And the indices on here that are applied are in a black tone. So they are in a black color. So are the hands. That looks really cool. Even the surround around the date is in black. So you have a black and white sort of contrasting dial here. And then you have the red GMT hand, which really stands out against that silver white background. It looks awesome on my 7.5 inch wrist. So lume is equally as good on all three watches. I would say that the ceramic bezel has a little bit better lume than the sapphire bezel, the previous version. Even though they're going to be still offering that bezel, this one has a little bit better lume because it's actually filled into the physical crevice of where those indices are carved into the bezel, whereas it's not printed on underneath a sapphire crystal. So you're getting a little bit more lume in the bezel. The hands, the indices, all are liberally applied with lume. And you can see there's actually more lume in the hour hand and the minute hand. It's physically larger, the reservoir of where the actual lume is being held. It's really hard to tell, but there's actually more space in that minute hand and in that hour hand that has lume when compared to the previous version. So lots of good stuff going into this watch, especially that extra hard coating, extra lume, and a larger crown. The bracelet sort of rework is also really good for people who have smaller wrists. For someone with a large wrist like mine, you probably would not notice, but it's still thinking about these things and actually executing it. That is excellent. And the fact that they are improving on something they really didn't need to improve on. It was already very well received. They didn't change anything that would scare anybody away, but they did make slight improvements and added something that no one would ever see. However, every owner would benefit from, that extra hard coating. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think of Jack Mason? What do you think of the brand? What they're doing with their watches? And what would you like to see from them next? Maybe a Watch Chris collaboration? Anybody? I don't know, add a comment down below. Do you want to see a Watch Chris collaboration with Jack Mason? I don't know. That's not in the works, so Peter would probably be very mad at me for even saying it, but that would be really cool. I think that would be a lot of fun to do, but anyway, tell me what you guys think down in the comments. I want to hear from you guys. Please also don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. It's super helpful for the channel, and I very much appreciate it. I'll put a link to these watches down in the description. Definitely check them out. If you end up buying one, tell them Watch Chris sent you. Anyway, guys, thank you for logging on. I'll catch you guys in the next video.